Why has Donald Trump immediately called a halt or called an immediate halt to all negotiations with Canada? Is it A, because Vladimir Putin told him to? Is it B, because he didn't like an advert featuring Ronald Reagan that was being broadcast in Canada? Or is it C, because he couldn't commit to any negotiations due to his golfing commitments? Here's your answer.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
And he's really taken his toys home as a consequence of that advert.
Absolutely. But the important thing to underscore here, there's so many things about this. First of all, that was Ronald Reagan speaking in one of his weekly radio addresses. You remember back in the day, the president every weekend would record a radio address and it would go out to the country. There are several of those weekly addresses by Ronald Reagan in which he expresses similar hostility to protectionism and advocates for free trade. That ad has been produced in Canada by the provincial government of Ontario. It's airing across American states that border Ontario. This is an initiative taken by the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford, who has been a persistent critic of Donald Trump and who has also pointed out that were Ontario to turn off its power exports to the United States, literally flick the switch and turn them off, Michigan, Minnesota, and New York City would go dark. And this is, of course, a representation of the fact that Doug Ford, and more broadly the national Canadian government, says that when Donald Trump continues to diminish Canada as a trading partner, it's literally Ontario that is keeping the lights on in Manhattan.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this ad is now airing and is completely stuck in Donald Trump's craw. And just 10 days after Mark Carney was last at the White House trying to romance Donald Trump, and
so this has nothing to do with Carney.
Nothing to do with Carney. This has all been placed by Doug Ford. So now Trump is cancelling, he says, in a fit of pique, all trade negotiations with Mark Carney and with the national federal government of Canada because he doesn't like a TV ad that Doug Ford has booked.
Hurty words, perhaps, is what we call it. What do you think will happen? Do you think Carney will ask Ford to pull it so that they can reopen?
I think we'll move on to another fit of pique about something else, and by next week they'll be back to having more trade conversations. I don't think so many of these paroxysms of fury are temporary. And one of the difficulties, and it's something that Ed Luce writes brilliantly about in that article that you were talking about, is just following the ball and trying to figure out if there is any rationale to anything. I mean, where we are at the end of this week vis-a-vis Ukraine is not where we thought we would be at the end of the last week. We see U-turn after U-turn after U-turn. And yet, as Ed Luce absolutely points out in the thrust of that article, not on the central proposition of Donald Trump's government, which is the constant expansion of his own power, an authoritarian executive, a presidency that is not constrained in any way, shape or form, and that is steamrollering the constitutional checks and balances that supposedly were going to defend democracy in the United States and that are largely falling by the wayside.
How well is that being reported, do you think? I mean, among your colleagues in the US media, some of whom are cowed, some of whom have actually bent the knee, but some of whom must still be doing their level best to chronicle the extent of the assault upon the norms, the democratic norms.
Yes, I mean, I do think it is extraordinary that it falls to people like Ed Luce, the Financial Times correspondent in Washington, D.C., and a host of other...
Oh, you? For my listeners.
Well, that's very nice of you, but I mean, there are others, James Matthews at Sky News, for example, who has chased down Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, at, I think, considerable risk to himself, and demanded to know whether Kash Patel had put public safety at risk recently when, in response to the killing of Charlie Kirk, he claimed a suspect was in custody when a suspect was not in custody. the traditional kind of watchdog role is not really being fulfilled by many American journalists. If you look at the New York Times yesterday, you had to get to the 15th paragraph of the New York Times article about the tearing down of the East Wing of the White House before you learnt that this had been done without any permission, without any oversight, without any accountability by the National Trust for Historic Preservation or the National Park Service. The 15th paragraph. I mean, they were lucky they squeezed it in. And that's just astonishing.
And these organisations, these heritage organisations, have expressed profound horror at what is going on, and that story changes daily as well. Not most obviously with the cost.
Yeah, we're now up to 3. Since I was just thinking on the way here, since the last time I sat in this chair,
which was 2 days ago.
Which 2 days ago, it's gone up by another 50 million. Now it's a 300 million, could go even higher. They have
the money's all private. It's all coming from mysterious sources.
Well, less mysterious now because under pressure they put out a list of donors last night who include many of the obvious characters: Amazon, Jeff Bezos, of course, Apple, Google, HP, Microsoft. An awful lot of crypto money going into this. Coinbase, Ripple, the Winklevoss twins putting money in. The Glazer family, part owners of Manchester United.
Very fondly looked upon in Manchester.
So, this money is pouring in. Former White House chief ethics lawyer calls the undertaking an ethics nightmare because, of course, we know who these people are now, some of them. Whether we ever find out exactly how much money they've all given and whether there is a true, complete list that is released at some point in the future, we'll have to see. But we have no idea what they've got in return for this, except, of course, Donald Trump's imprimatur and thanks. And clearly, they are buying access to the president by putting this kind of money up at a time, James, when we are into the 24th or is it the 25th day of the government shutdown, and federal government workers in Washington, D.C. are reported now to be going to food banks because they're not being paid and they haven't got enough money to go to the supermarket this week to buy provisions for their household. Government civil servants finding themselves going to food banks because of a government shutdown while the president is sitting there holding up pictures of this Versailles-like golden ballroom.
Oh, it's much more vulgar than Versailles. And briefly, remind us how the lockdown ends.
Well, the shutdown only ends if there's a political compromise that can be forged between Republicans and Democrats. They tried again yesterday. They failed. There's no indication that either side is completely ready to blink. There are certainly some waverers on both sides that are getting nervous about all of this. But, we're 24, 25 days into this. In a week's time, we'll be at a full month, and there is currently no end in sight.
And again, to clarify, when the ballroom is finished and people pay, I don't know, $100,000 or $1 million to attend functions in the way that they do at Mar-a-Lago, even Donald Trump will probably balk at trying to put the money directly into his own pockets, but it will make its way into the presidential library or the campaign fund or whatever.
I mean, I think that may be true, particularly about Mar-a-Lago. Whether that's true about this ballroom or not, I think we'll have to see exactly how it pans out, because it's not even clear how operational it's going to be during Donald Trump's period in office. Now, you could argue, as many people do, that if you were planning to leave the White House in 2028, you probably wouldn't commission a ballroom that might not be completely finished by then, although the rapidity with which they have torn down the East Wing of the White House suggests...
To think of it as one of the few buildings in the world that most people... the Taj Mahal...
Yeah.
Probably not Buckingham Palace, because it always looks less impressive. Windsor Castle, Taj Mahal, White House, buildings that a significant number of people on the planet would recognise in a photo lineup. It's been completely, one side of it has been completely razed to the ground.
And out of nowhere. If we'd sat here a week ago and you'd said to me, I'll tell you what, Simon, next week he's going to tear down the East Wing of the White House.
Don't play that game anymore.
Don't
play that game anymore.
But this has now got a fast track beneath it that is speeding this construction project towards completion. He's absolutely determined to do it. He's determined that it should be used as a convening location for foreign dignitaries and their entourages to be entertained when they are at the White House. But clearly there are all sorts of other possible uses to which it could one day be put.
We watch with interest. And then we come to one of the few areas of consistency in Donald Trump's modus operandi, which is vengeance. vengeance against people who have slighted him or pursued him in the past. We know John Bolton has been indicted. We know that James Comey. Letitia James, I think, is in court this week, in court today possibly. What's that story about?
Yes,
she's the New York Attorney General.
She's the Attorney General who pursued the conspiracy charges against the Trump Organization. Remember the court case that found that Donald Trump had overinflated the value of his assets in order to attract loans on favourable terms from financial institutions. She is now facing what is without doubt retribution at the hands of Donald Trump. She's facing accusations of alleged mortgage fraud. According to the prosecution that she's facing, she purchased a second property, describing it as a second home to get an advantageous mortgage rate, but then used it as an investment property, which breaches the rules and might have saved her about $18,000 over the life of the mortgage. Now, she insists she did nothing wrong. The courts, of course, will now make that determination. And, mortgage fraud is a crime, but it is also absolutely apparent that what Donald Trump is doing is using his personally selected head of the housing regulator in Washington to look under the bonnet of all of these different people that have wronged him. So we've seen exactly the same kind of allegations being levelled against Lisa Cook, like Letitia James, also an African-American woman who sits on the Federal Reserve Committee. And she's being accused of mortgage fraud as well. So there's no question that this housing regulator is being used as an office of political retribution by the president as he goes after his opponents, in exactly the same way as the FBI, the Department of Justice, are now completely politicised tools of retribution, because what he's done is pierced the traditional independence of the Department of Justice. And it's really important to underscore the independence of the Department of Justice turns out to be traditional, not constitutionally protected, very much like the White House. Traditionally, you're supposed to go and ask permission to tear down the East Wing, but if you're a cultural vandal and you actually just tear it down and don't seek that permission, it turns out it's not legally required.
I have some details since we've come on air of how Donald Trump has responded, or his latest contribution to the Canada story, which you began your bulletin today. Would you like to hear it?
I'd love to.
So the first 5 letters are in capital letters. Canada cheated and got caught! ! ! ! ! They fraudulently took a big buy ad saying that Ronald Reagan did not like tariffs, when actually he, capital letters, loved tariffs for our country and its national security. New sentence. Canada is trying to illegally influence the United States Supreme Court in one of the most important rulings in the history of our country. Canada has long cheated on tariffs, charging our farmers as much as 400%. Now they and other countries can't take advantage of the US any longer. Thank you to the Ronald Reagan Foundation for exposing this, capital letters, fraud. Make America great again! ! ! ! Yeah,
they're claiming selective use of the clip. But as
there's
I say,
loads of them.
There are multiple presidential addresses in which Ronald Reagan articulated very, very similar viewpoints. I do think that he's very concerned about that Supreme Court case, because if the Supreme Court rules that his tariffs were unconstitutional, that is going to rip the guts out of not just his trade policy, but his foreign policy too.
Because he's done everything he can to rig the Supreme Court during his first term and subsequently. So if they actually find enough vertebrae to say, not this one, champ.
It would be very problematic for him.
Which is why we'll be talking to you soon.